Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Geese, and I'm a partner at Analytics. And I guess, first of all, I'd just like to say thanks, Rob and David, for inviting me to speak today. I appreciate the invite. Rob and I go a ways back. We've both been going to RSNA for many years and have haven't had a chance to get to know each other a bit. And more recently, I hope, Rob, this is okay. I say this, but we worked together on a recent FDA submission. So
100%. Yeah, go for it.
sure, yeah. Our team helped Rapid Imaging clear the OHIP viewer or the FlexView viewer. So, but yeah. So today I'm going to be speaking a little bit about the FDA regulation of diagnostic imaging AI. This is a big topic, so I'm going to be speaking. I've got about 15 minutes, so I'm going to go quick. First, a little about me. As I mentioned, I'm a partner at Analytics, and in the last 14 years, I've helped build and FDA clear 35 diagnostic medical devices, many of them involving diagnostic AI imaging. And I also speak and write broadly on these topics, especially in places where there's an overlap between software and regulatory. So for this talk, there's, I think, two main goals I have. One is just to share a basic overview of the US FDA regulatory process. And then second, to dive into some specific considerations and challenges for diagnostic imaging AI. And I would also point out, especially focused on the more traditional AI, not as much the generative AI, as that's still kind of being explored and built out, although we do have some experience there as well. I won't really be talking about it. So really quick, going through the basics, as I'm sure most everyone here knows, that if you're marketing your device in the US, the Food and Drug Administration is the governing body that regulates that. Software can be a medical device. I think in everyday English, usually you think of a device as being a physical thing, but in regulatory speak, we still call a medical device or software a medical device. And there's this term software as a medical device, or SAMD, that you'll see frequently used here. And then similarly, the company that is building the software is considered the manufacturer. So usually the first regulatory question when you have a software product is this a medical device? And a lot of the times it's very obvious if it is, but there is some nuance to this. For example, there's a category of software called non-device MDDS, where you're just moving images around, that was deregulated and is no longer considered a medical device. And there's other kind of borderline cases like that. But in general, software that's intended for the use in the diagnosis of disease or in the cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease is considered a medical device. And I would also mention I've got links in a number of these slides of some articles and resources for anyone who's interested in diving into more detail. But once you've determined that your device software is a medical device, the next step is classifying it. And for the most part, diagnostic AI is a class 2 device, which means that you'll be needing to do a pre-market submission and to establish a quality management system. And there's a number of other regulations that you'll need to comply with, but these are the big ones. And so pre-market submission is a set of documents, a comprehensive set of documents that covers what your device is intended to do, what information you're sharing with users, how you built it, how it works, how you tested it, and so on. And also puts a lot of emphasis on cybersecurity. So for class 2 devices, there's really two primary paths. So there's the 510K path, which is where your device is substantially equivalent to an existing device. And this is more common, but I would say with AI, there is definitely been an increase in de novo submissions, and the de novo submissions are for situations where there is no existing device in the market that is similar. A lot of the documentation that goes into both of these is the same, but their purpose is different. 510K, you're showing your device is similar to, for de novo, you're showing that the benefit risk, or the benefits of using your device outweighs the risk, and you're defining a new class of product. So really quick, just to give you a feeling for some of the documents that would go into a 510K, and almost all of these also go into De Novo. It's quite a bit of work, and it can easily be into the thousands of pages. But I would say, fortunately, the FDA and Health Canada use this eStar interactive PDF, which can kind of guide you through the process, but nevertheless, having some support to understand and how to write and lay out these documents can be really helpful, especially just knowing how much detail you need to put into it. So really briefly, I just want to talk through a typical timeline for a new startup. So in this diagram, time's flowing from left to right, and this kind of shows the key interaction points with the FDA. So on the top, we have the more pre-market submission side of things, and on the bottom, we have the quality management system. And as you can see, you really start interacting with the FDA sooner on the pre-market submission side. So as you're building your device, you may decide that you want to interact with the FDA, ask them questions. Often this is about the design of any clinical studies that you're doing to support your device, to make sure they agree with the approach before you spend significant money on doing the study. But then, you'll put together all the documentation, do all the testing, cybersecurity testing, and so on. You'll submit to FDA. There's a delay. Then they come back almost always come back asking for more information. And you have a certain amount of time, up to 180 days to reply. And then once you reply, you'll then get a letter either saying, yep, your device is cleared, or it is not. And at that point, you're almost there. You also need to then have a full quality management system set up, and you need to register and list your device. And then at that point, you can legally start selling your device. And also FDA may audit you, and usually up to twice or every 2 years, but sometimes it's not that frequent. The last thing I just want to point out is once your device is on the market, you can continue to make changes to your software. Not all changes require additional 510K submissions. And so there's actually quite a bit of strategy, especially with SAMD products, around the order that you do development to kind of minimize how many additional 510Ks you need to do. There's also a relatively new opportunity around with this thing called a PCCP that can reduce the number of additional submissions you need to do. So in summary, I would say the FDA definitely, they care about what your product does, but they also care about how you made it. And so keep both in mind. And one common problem I see is companies will start thinking about the regulations too far along, where they've already done a lot of the work, and they don't have a good process, and so it can be challenging to then go back and change that, because FDA does, again, care both about the final product as well as the process. Okay, so now let's zoom into diagnostic imaging AI a little bit here. So first, this is a way that the FDA categorizes diagnostic imaging AI, starting with the lowest risk type of devices on the bottom, going up in risk. So on the lowest tier here, we have devices that just make measurements, or what I would call like a pure quantitative imaging device. This may mean because there's nothing that the AI needs to detect per se, or perhaps the clinician is actually guiding the AI by clicking a seed point and then it's taking the measurement there. These are relatively low risk because the clinician's interacting and viewing the results immediately. There's some risk of bias, but FDA views this as the kind of the lowest risk type of device. Then moving up a level, we have, this is a little less common of a type of device, but computer-aided acquisition and optimization. So for example, a device that upsamples and denoises brain MR scans. Then we have computer-aided triage, which is not really intended to make any diagnostic claims, but it's just reordering the read order. Although interestingly, there's definitely some companies on the market that they focus on CAD-T devices with the understanding that it's used off-label as CAD-E, as a CAD-E device, and that seems actually to be kind of common strategy in this space. But then going up, we've got detection, diagnosis, and detection, diagnosis. So I would note with all of these are links to the FDA product codes, So Analytics has developed some software that lets you view the product codes and all the clearances in them. And so anyway, if anyone's interested, you can click these and see examples of similar devices that are on the market. So for each of these types of devices, there's increasing regulatory scrutiny as the risk goes up. There's some things that all the devices need to do, specifically with relation to AI transparency. All devices will need to disclose a certain amount of information about what data was used to train and test your device, whether, and this is meant to kind of disclose to users what types of biases, as I saw the trail end of the last talk, it's meant to disclose what types of biases may be in the device. Also, you'll need to follow good data management practices, in particular, keeping your test data separate from your training data, and also making sure you just are tracking what data was used to train which models, which is a common problem. We have clients come to us sometimes in research settings where they don't do this, and they'll have a model that they maybe even done studies on, but they don't know the provenance of that model, which can be a challenge and sometimes can require the need to retrain and rerun testing. Finally, I'll talk a little bit about this more, but there's typically two types of testing you need to do. There's the standalone performance testing that all these devices need, except occasionally quantitative imaging devices we've seen don't always need this. And then also there's reader studies, which the higher risk devices need. And finally, I'd mention the FDA has been emphasizing increasingly in talks and presentations they've given and in the new draft AI guidance that they want to focus more on monitoring the performance of AI once it's on the market. But there's a lot of interesting questions around their authority to do that and how they would regulate that. But we know this is something they'd like to do and will likely be requesting, especially in any de novo submissions where there's new special controls being defined for new types of devices. So, so zooming into the performance studies, we got standalone performance studies and reader studies, and they really have a different purpose. So the standalone performance study are meant to analyze the performance of the AI on its own, whereas the reader studies are comparing the human and the AI working together versus just the AI. And so this is one of the reasons why the cost can be significantly higher, because generally you'll need 6 to 12 radiologists to read a group of studies, often like 200 to 300 studies or even more, both with the AI and then without. And there's typically a washout period in between those two phases. And so as you can imagine, if you have US board certified radiologists doing hundreds of reads multiple times, and you have quite a few radiologists, this just very quickly becomes an expensive endeavor, both to run just the complexity of running it, but also just getting the time from the radiologist. So how am I doing on time? Okay. Really quickly, I've got a couple examples to talk through. So this was not a product that I was involved with, but I thought it was a good kind of characteristic example that's similar to a lot of submissions that I've done. It's a computer-aided detection tool designed to assist in the detection of pleural effusion. So they did both standalone and performance testing and a reader study. As is typical, they had, I'd say it's very common to be like 200 to 400 cases, although it can vary quite a bit. You need to have data from multiple centers, and these centers generally can't be from the same places where you collected your training data. That's a common pitfall that we see people doing. Another thing is that 50% of the data needs to come from the US. This is specifically for the testing, not for the training. They're usually much more flexible when it comes to the training data. And then also it's very common for the test data set to be enriched with abnormal cases. The other things I'd point out here is if there's the opportunity to use pathology or some other means to define the right answer, like the reference standard, you should use that, but often with radiology or imaging AI devices, that's not possible, and so the reference standard will be defined by expert consensus, and often that means 2 US board certified radiologists with 5 or more years of experience both doing the read, and then a third expert, ideally even with more experience, adjudicating anytime there's a disagreement. And this is used to define the reference standard and measure how well the device is performing. I would also say that you use a similar reference standard for the reader studies, but then again you have this process where you have all the radiologists read with and without the AI. And I'll also just mention the typical metric for reader studies is the change in the area under the ROC curve. And a challenge with this, I'm just going to really briefly mention the second example. A common challenge is the AI, you have situations where the AI is extremely good, but the readers don't use the AI, and so they don't actually improve, even though the standalone performance is quite excellent. And we found that FDA can be very reasonable in these cases. This is an example of a device, a project that I did, a CADx project, and this is all public in the 510K summary, where there was definitely a challenge because of this. So really quick, a few just comments and suggestions after having done a lot of these submissions. With the sample population, it needs to represent the intended use population, 50% from the US. Note that the sample size for your studies is not typically determined by the statistical power. That's something that people often think. But it's usually larger than that due to the need to show generalizability through subgroup analysis of a number of different factors. FDA almost always requires at least 3 different data that has been collected from 3 different sites that are not used in the training. I think, most of this I've already talked about. I just mentioned, you also, a common thing people try to do is to use their AI to pre-annotate the data to reduce the time, the cost of defining reference standard, but the FDA will not typically allow that. They will, however, allow you to use other AI devices that aren't related to yours, and they will allow you to use either foreign radiologists or technicians to kind of pre-annotate it with some constraints. Like you couldn't use the same technician to pre-annotate it for all 3 of the radiologists. You typically need 3 different technicians to each independently annotate it as a pre-annotation for the 3 radiologists. I think that is all that I had. Of course, that's just really skimming the surface. We have a lot of talks and articles on our website that go into in-depth on a lot of this, and I also have links to a number of the most relevant FDA guidance documents. And then finally, I would just say that analytics, my company, we help startups go through this process and have a lot of experience, and would love to talk if anyone could use support in this area. So thanks Rob. Sorry if I ate into too much of your time there.